And with that, we will directly dive into the next session. It's a presentation on mapping results of online work with perpetrators. And we will hear from the WWP European Network, from Berta Vall and Nora Regos. Berta is the Research and Development Manager of Work with Perpetrators. She is in charge of developing the Impact Outcome Toolkit, monitoring toolkit, and coordinates research on it. Berta has great expertise in project development and in research and data analysis in the fields of psychology and intimate partner violence. She will be joined by Nora, who has a master's in sociology and public policy. She focused on working with victims of domestic violence and human trafficking as a helpline operator, support group facilitator, and social worker, providing trauma-informed psychosocial support. She's also involved in training professionals on gender-based violence against women and girls, with a special focus on risk assessment and safety planning. So very curious to hear from both of your work, and welcome Nora and Berta.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm going to try to share screen. Okay, can you see it well? Great. So we will now present the findings of a mapping study that we have very recently completed on current practices in online perpetrator programs across Europe. We will begin by outlining the objectives of this research. We will then describe the methodology that we used, followed by the main results. We also wanted to acknowledge that given the limited time of this session, we will not cover every result in depth. Instead, we will focus on describing where online perpetrator programs are based or currently available in Europe, the formats in which these programs operate, and the main gaps and priorities for further development in this field. So, as a background, we know that perpetrator interventions have traditionally been delivered face-to-face. The shift into online spaces is therefore, as we all know, a relatively new phenomenon. Since the COVID-19 crisis and also with the growing integration of digital technologies, not also in our lives, as Elena was mentioning before, but also in our services, the move towards online delivery of perpetrator programs has been accelerated. We also know that despite these changes, this field remains in its early stages, meaning that it's still unclear how these online programs are delivered, or even more importantly, which is the impact of these programs. But first of all, what do we mean when we say online IPV perpetrator programs? We think that it's very important to start this introduction and this first session on this topic by clarifying that under this category, there are several different practices embedded. And some of these include, for example, there are some programs that offer some online elements as an add-on or as a support to the regular in-person group programs. That might be, for example, some extra modules that might be delivered online before starting the program or similar aspects, but that are considered a different practice from the in-person group perpetrator programs. Then we also have some programs that deliver certain phases of the program, of the intervention, for example, the intake phase or the follow-up in an online format. We also have programs that deliver online interventions exclusively individual, and that means that when they do online interventions, they are always individual. And finally, we also have programs that have moved entirely online and that they now deliver full group perpetrator interventions virtually. All these modalities were included in our mapping. And as you can guess, each of these modalities have their own challenges, risks, but also their own opportunities. We are also aware that there are new models that continue to emerge very fast, reflecting this ongoing evolution in the field, but we chose to focus on these specific modalities, which are the ones that we also detected that were more used by our members. So what did we do exactly in this mapping? First of all, we had some guiding questions. We wanted to know first which perpetrator programs are currently offering online services in Europe. And this, as you can see, is a very, let's say, simple question, but this is because in the research that we have done, we found no information that would standardize or describe in detail where are those programs located. We also wanted to know how are these services delivered in practice. So very practically, we wanted to know which changes have these programs experienced when they have shifted from in-person to online delivery. So we wanted to know what changes they had to do, why they had to do these changes, and things like this. And finally, we also wanted to know what were the main challenges. Some of these challenges, we think they are more known by all of us, but some of those might be also quite rather new, let's say. And we also wanted to know, obviously, the good practices or the emerging innovative practices that our members were delivering. So how did we try to answer to these questions? We began with the desk research. We focused on seeing which is the available literature on online perpetrator programs, but we also included some research on online group psychotherapy. And I will explain a little bit more why we did this choice. And basically, we wanted to know in general what is available, what knowledge is out there from the published material. But we also wanted to go more in deep to learn about the experiences of the professionals. And we conducted 12 in-depth interviews with programs that were at that point of the interviews actively delivering services online in one of the formats that I have just explained. And these interviews basically wanted to answer to the research questions that I have just mentioned. So we focused on the delivery mode of the online program, but also we wanted to know how evaluation, how risk assessment and risk management, how safety are handled when moving online, and also the skills and challenges, as I have mentioned before, faced by facilitators. So going to the most interesting part of the presentation, which are the main results. First, we will describe the results from the desk research, and then we will move to the results of the interviews. As for the results of the desk research, we saw, and basically the results also confirmed that there is very little research or very little documents available on the topic of online IPP perpetrator programs. At WWP, we previously developed some practice toolkits to support online work with perpetrators. Those toolkits were based on a series of focus groups discussions that we had with practitioners who, 1 year after the pandemic, were still delivering services online. Basically, this work revealed that there was a lack of tools at that moment, that was in 2021, a lack of tools, lack of guidance documents, but also a lack of opportunities for critical reflection about the move to the online sphere among many professionals. And for this reason, the toolkit aimed to foster this reflection and aimed to reflect about some of the assumptions that some professionals had around online perpetrator programs. At that point, we were still very far from providing specific recommendations, but the aim of the toolkit, as I was saying, was more to promote this critical reflection. And as I was saying, there are very few initiatives still nowadays, very few research, very few studies that describe, for example, how victim safety is ensured or how risk management procedures are adapted when moving online. But an important exception is the work of Bellini and Westmoreland, which highlights both the opportunities but also the challenges that are inherent in online domestic violence perpetrator programs. And they highlight particularly the need to consider how to engage participants, how to make participants accountable, something that was mentioning also in the opening words, how to monitor safety when moving online. But we will hear more about this research in the next presentation by Professor Westmoreland. And precisely because the evidence in our field remains very limited, we thought it would be useful also to look what is known in the field of online group psychotherapy. And there we found a few guidelines but quite general guidelines that provide some, let's say, foundational principles for safe, ethical, and effective online group therapy, but not very specific on the practice, let's say. One other exception of that is the studies conducted by Weinberg that we think that they offer a particularly valuable point of reflection for perpetrator programs when moving online. The studies of Weinberg are different from some earlier studies that provide these general recommendations, as I was saying, or also many of the online group psychotherapy studies. They focus on comparing online and offline outcomes. But the study of Weinberg, as I was saying, is a bit different. It highlights more the practical challenges of conducting online group psychotherapy. And by doing so, it emphasizes the importance of the facilitator skills. And also it adopts an embodied perspective that recognizes how the body and also the sense of presence shape the group dynamics in an online format. So we will also hear more about his research later today, and I think it's going to be a very interesting reflection on how these insights might also inform our field. And I will now hand over to my colleague Nora, who will present the main findings from the interviews that we conducted with facilitators.
Thank you. So on this map that you can see, we have highlighted the countries where we identified and interviewed programs who offer different levels of online services mentioned by Berta. There might be online perpetrator work in other countries as well who may missed in the mapping. If you know about such programs, please let us know in the chat. So what you can see here is that lighter greens indicate exceptional or occasional online individual sessions during in-person programs, while mid green indicates one online group per year. The darkened green refers to programs which offer more regular and structured individual and/or group work as part of their services. The darkest green is the program where most of the services are delivered online. Next, please. Our mapping identified several emerging good practices that respond critically to the different gaps and aspects mentioned earlier by Berta. What all interviewed experts highlighted is the importance of consistency, having clear participation rules since the very beginning that are reinforced if clients break those rules. Some clients tend to take online sessions less seriously as they feel more comfortable from joining from their homes, and this can lead to attitudes, behaviors that stretches the program framing, like smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol during the session, or not being dressed adequately, or joining to the session from a public space, from cafes, from public transport, so the session is really interrupted and not safe. It's very important to address these breaches immediately. Experts also mentioned several aspects of online services that needs to be adapted compared to offline perpetrator work. They mostly shortened sessions to 1.5 hours, still meeting weekly in most cases. It's because attention span is normally shorter in online work than when you work in person, and maybe there are more possibilities for distractions. It's also better to have less participants in these groups, maybe around 5 clients at most, as it can be also more difficult to pay attention to all these participants in such a setting for facilitators as well. However, content and topics covered during these programs are quite similar or the same as them for offline groups, but maybe they are addressed in different ways. For example, facilitators maybe use more videos on these sessions. They send out handouts, several materials beforehand, or also weekly reminders with the session link, or they are using breakout rooms for pair work or for small group work. Regarding the human connection side of online setting, several professionals mentioned as a gap the lack of or limited access to non-verbal cues, seeing only half of the person, just their upper body. It's harder for facilitators to notice emotional or mood changes, triggers in clients, or if they are tapping their legs, which can be compensated by more contextualized, explicit verbalizing of what's going on the session. Experts also mentioned that some therapeutic methods which rely more on facial, emotional, or somatic expressions might work less effectively online, but as Berta mentioned, we will hear more about it later this afternoon from Mr. Weinberg. As a consequence, the depth and quality of connections among participants themselves and between clients and facilitator or therapist maybe can be more superficial than in an offline setting. On the other hand, with clients joining online services from their homes, facilitators can gain more insights about clients' environment, their living conditions, that was not accessible before if they would just go to the venue offline, and they can tailor and include this insight in the program procedures based on this extra information. Also, several professionals mentioned that they experience slightly less dropouts in online setting, as it may be more engaging at the beginning for clients, or it's easier for them to join and to participate in such settings. These programs also contribute highly to reflect systematic gaps of the field by developing manuals, guidelines based on their recent experiences, gaining more reliable knowledge on what could work well in this setting with perpetrators. Several professionals mentioned that online setting can be used more for maybe educational or psychoeducational purposes, or as pre-programmed webinars on specific topics before the structured group or individual work starts. However, there are still many professionals who use online setting in individual therapeutical work. So this type of work might be more beneficial for clients who are living in rural areas or abroad with limited access to such services, or maybe for first-time offenders or perpetrators who are posing lower risk, or clients who suffer from severe social anxiety or having a huge amount of shame that might inhibit them to attend in an in-person meeting or an in-person group, but they are still really willing to work on their behavior, and online setting can be more comfortable or more safer for them. However, it's key to understand to whom and for what reasons we are offering online services. It shouldn't be just for the convenience of the perpetrators or for the facilitators, but it should be a grounded decision that still expects clients to put effort in this work and that they show a minimum level of motivation to change their violent behaviors. Based on these experiences and practices shared during the mapping, we gathered the following recommendations as potential next steps. For the intake phase, having a standard eligibility criteria by which potential clients are selected is key to exclude people who are emotionally, mentally, unstable, or that they suffer from severe psychiatric issues, having suicidal thoughts, or has no separate space to log in from, or if we have the risk that the sessions can be interrupted or not safe, or victims or children living in the same household, and they might be exposed to listening or hearing the sessions, or if the clients are not having their own devices. Sorry, I'm just having a flu.
Thank you for being here anyway and doing the presentation. We all know how that goes, and sometimes it's good to be able to do that online, right? So thanks for being here with us.
Yeah, thanks for your understanding. So these criteria can be measured through thorough risk assessment at the beginning. However, we also know that already existing risk assessment tool might not include these risk factors that are essential to monitor in an online setting. So these can be also extended with the risk factors mentioned earlier in the morning presentations. During the program, due to the geographical distances and limited connections with clients, It's more difficult for program providers to intervene in risky situations or provide extra support when needed. To overcome these challenges, it is recommended to strengthen collaborations with local institutions and authorities like police, probation officers, family centers, and so on. This can include forms of joint risk management or local partners offering spaces for clients to join the session. This can give the client a more official framing of the program, that this is an activity which is something different that they normally do at home. We cannot emphasize enough the importance of safety protocols, how to ensure safety for victims by working online, integrating victims' voices in the process of perpetrator work, checking with them how perpetrators' behavior changes over time, and if it's still safe for the victims that the clients join this online format. And that ensuring that clients are not using this format as an opportunity to commit tag-based violence against their partners. Regarding confidentiality, there are several platforms that are using encrypted codes or not, storing data on the cloud, and that are maybe safer to use for such therapeutic work or such interventional or behavioral work. However, we maybe cannot really ensure that clients don't do recordings of the sessions or that our online spaces are not used adequately by the participants. But it's important to really have consequences or be clear about the consequences if a client breaches these rules. As for the follow-up, we would encourage more specific research on this topic, including more practitioners' experiences collecting longitudinal data and having more reliable standard evaluation procedures to have a better understanding on the effectiveness of how online perpetrator work works. And that what format, what methods can be used with whom, in which circumstances, effectively and safely. Sharing manuals, guidelines, offering training would be also essential to spread good practices and benefit from this emerging trend, not leaving clients nor practitioners alone with their doubts or concerns, but providing a safety guard for all. We hope that this mapping can serve as a first step to achieve these goals. Thank you, and back to you, Berta.
Thank you very much. So we know that this presentation is rather short, so we wanted to invite you to join our next webinar, in which we will focus more in detail about the results that we obtained in this mapping, and also some of the open discussions and different actions that we discussed with the facilitators that we interviewed. So you can find more information in our website, or also you can contact us by email. And if you have any specific questions that you really want to make, you can also add them in the chat and we will try to answer to them. Thank you very much.